Citizens of Rome! It has come to the attention of the Senate that many of you base your views on Sparta on popular movies, especially the one where Gerard Butler kicks the guy with the facial piercings into a conveniently placed giant pit.
This is Sparta!
I love that film.
The Senate has therefore decided to rectify your misconceptions with regard to this historical period, by which I mean school y'all on what's real and what ain't. But before your education commences, the Senate requires that you press like, subscribe, and enable bell notifications so that you may receive future updates whenever there's History in the Forum! Citizens, you have been told a fanciful narrative about Sparta. You have been convinced that Sparta was a society of unbeatable super soldiers whose tough military education and warrior ethos made them unstoppable. You have been shown moving pictures of shirtless hunks who talk about freedom and saved ancient Greece from the Persians by kicking ass. All of that has been framed as a well-oiled military machine which steamrolled its Greek rivals. But all of that has been false. Sparta is probably the most misunderstood ancient polity. Believe it or not, citizens, Hollywood lied to you, and the real Sparta was nothing like in the movies. To this end, we must paint a picture of the true Sparta, as it genuinely was. Be forewarned, citizens, the picture is not attractive. It will feature tales of violence, sexual violence, child abuse, child sexual abuse, abandonment, and corruption. Let's start with the myth of Spartan military training. At age 7, Spartan boys would be taken from their homes and sent to the Agoge, where they'd be turned into Spartiates, the elite heavy infantrymen which formed the Spartan phalanx. Except no, they weren't getting military training in the Agoge. What they were getting is abused. Spartan boys would be deliberately starved in the Agoge, encouraging them to steal food in order to survive. However, if caught, they'd be severely beaten, and not by authority figures, but by older boys in the same system. The boys would often be beaten for minor or even imagined infractions by the older boys in the Agoge. There was even an annual ritualized flogging of Spartan boys at the altar of Artemis, which was bad enough that some were killed. At the age of 12, Spartan boys were expected to find a sponsor among the younger Spartiates, those younger than 30 who by Spartan law cannot marry. However, this wasn't the kind of sponsorship you find on YouTube. Rather, it was expected of the boy to submit to the sexual advances of the man, and in return, he'd secure for his young charge an eventual place in the Syssitia, a kind of Spartan communal mess and barrack room. At the risk of getting this channel demonetized in its first video, the Senate feels the need to spell out the reality in plain language. The Spartan system depended on child rape to perpetuate itself. Once the children reached a certain age, early to mid-teenagehood, they'd enter the Crypteia. The Crypteia were gangs of young men who'd run around the countryside and terrorize the Helot population, the Helots being the slaves of the Spartan state. Indeed, graduation from the Agoge usually required the murder of an adult Helot male, which the aspiring Spartiate would usually commit at night and from an ambush. Helots who appeared strong, smart, or spirited were preferred targets for these kinds of murders, and the more general terror of the Crypteia, because the Spartiate class preferred that their slaves remain weak, stupid, and unspirited. You must wonder why it would be necessary to kill a man in order to graduate. The responsible citizen is rightfully repulsed by the notion of killing an innocent man, even a slave, something that other slave-owning societies like Athens and Rome prohibited. However, if you shift your perspective and start thinking like a gangster, it makes perfect sense. The helot has to be killed because it is the final step of a gang initiation, the tail end of a process meant to groom young men into gangsters or child soldiers. After first removing the child from his family, the system exposes him to extreme stresses in the forms of violence and malnutrition. As reward for survival and advancing, it presents the opportunity for indulging in violence, thus paying the abuse forward to the next generation of boys entering the agoge. Success in life hinges on the ability to find and sexually please a man much older than themselves. Preparing for life as an adult, the boys are expected to terrorize unarmed men, women, and children of the helot underclass as part of the crypteia, with the final exam taking the form of a cold-blooded murder. Frankly, it doesn't seem like a system for rearing the youth that an honest citizen should admire. Horrifying though the agoge may have been, there are those naysayers who will say that it was necessary for the survival of the Spartan state, for it provided the elite Spartiates necessary to wage its many successful wars. And here, citizens, we must once again disentangle fact from fiction, especially Hollywood fiction, as the Spartan military record leaves much to be desired. The Spartans have a reputation for being undefeated. The myth of the undefeated Spartans, who were tough because of their brutal training, survives to our age. And yet, it is just a myth. Xenophon, an Athenian who wished his city were more like Sparta, is quite clear that the agoge did not include much in the way of military training. Indeed, when the Spartans fought, they fought like all other Greeks, in phalanx formation with their large shields held high and pushing against the enemy, which, due to the fact that the enemy was usually another Greek city, meant pushing against another phalanx. When it comes to the military record of the Spartans, it is not very impressive. Probably the most famous battle is the Battle of Thermopylae, from the aforementioned film with Gerard Butler. But it bears repeating that it is a battle that Sparta lost, and furthermore, one that Sparta did not fight alone. The other famous one is the Battle of Plataea against the Persians, where they do see victory, but as part of an alliance. They're notably absent at probably the most important battle of ancient Greece at Marathon, where Athens defeats the Persians all by itself. In many of its other battles, Sparta has some victories but also defeats against Greek cities, ranging from Argos to Thebes. And of course, Sparta clashes with Macedonia, the real superpower of the Hellenic world, 3 times. Once, they refused to even show up, allowing Philip II to seize their territory with no battle, and the other 2 times, at Megalopolis and Sellasia, well, to use a technical term, they get absolutely crushed, and Sparta loses its independence. What the Spartans were good at was not battle against peers, but rather battle against their own slaves, the helots. Not only were these the most mistreated slaves in all Greece, but the Spartans also regularly declared war against them. Sometimes the helots fought back, but as it usually happens, overworked, underfed slaves could hardly defeat professional soldiers. Kudos, however, to the Spartans for beating these wretched, downtrodden specimens of humanity. Leaving aside its unimpressive battle record, we find that Sparta also loses wars when it wins battles, and loses the peace, even when it wins wars, due to its strategic incompetence. Sparta did win one major war, though, and that was the Peloponnesian War. This was a conflict which engulfed the entire ancient Greek world because it was a clash of its two largest alliances. On one hand was the Delian League, led by Athens, an alliance which had unparalleled maritime power at the time. On the other hand was the Peloponnesian League, led by Sparta, which also included the powerful city of Corinth. These two alliances feared each other and seemed set on clashing sooner than later. And then they did. During the war, Sparta tried to attack Athens 7 times overland, and every time they found themselves forced to retreat because they ran out of supplies. This is despite the fact that Athens is not very far from Sparta, and Corinth, which was an ally of the Spartans and a major port city, is even closer. The Spartans seem to have no understanding of logistics, something that other powers such as Persia, Macedon, and our proud republic have mastered. Of course, Spartans could never deploy in large enough numbers anyway, because they needed to keep a large force in Sparta to prevent the Helots from revolting. Remember that the Spartan economy depended on these enslaved people, who hated the Spartans deeply and revolted at every chance they got. So, if the Spartans were incompetent and couldn't take Athens, how did they win the Peloponnesian War? It's quite simple. They had help from Persia. I know, that's a shock. The enemy of all free Greeks. The Spartans enlisted the help of the Athenian Alcibiades, who had betrayed his city, and he negotiated for Persian money and know-how how to build and field the Spartan fleet, which would disrupt Athens' domination on the seas. Without its fleet, Athens would be left unable to finance its armies and even feed itself. And so, Alcibiades made an alliance with the Persians on behalf of the Spartans, and a Spartan fleet was built under the command of Lysander. Lysander was not a Spartiate, but rather a Mothax, which means he had a Helot mother, and as such, he was not a citizen of Sparta. Nevertheless, he managed to defeat the Athenians at sea with the newly produced Spartan fleet. Unable to feed and finance itself without its fleet, Athens soon surrendered after a siege and was defeated. Thanks to Alcibiades the traitor, Lysander the bastard, and the Persians, Sparta was victorious. Oh, and the Persians seized all of the Ionian Greek cities, but I'm sure it was worth it. But less than a year later, the pro-Spartan regime of Athens, also known as the 30 Tyrants, was toppled and replaced once again with Athenian democracy. What's more, Spartan diplomatic arrogance provoked a second war, this time with their allies Corinth and Thebes, helped by a resurgent Athens, and the Spartans had to once again beg the Persians to save them. The Persians did manage to threaten the city-states into making a peace favorable to Sparta, but soon this peace broke down, and another war broke out, again fought between Sparta on one side and Thebes and Athens on the other. With the Spartans decisively defeated at Leuctra, this brought their hegemonic period to an end after only 30 years, and it also brought the loss of territory in Messenia and the liberation of the Messenian Helots, undercutting Sparta's slave-dependent economy. Citizens, we hope that our presentation has disabused you of Hollywood's fantasies about Sparta. It was not an admirable state, more akin to a gang of bandits. It was not militarily capable, nor did it have a sophisticated economy, cultural achievements, or great philosophers. The false image of Sparta leads some of you to admire this dysfunctional state, and this is why the Senate saw it fit to correct the public record. The Senate would like to thank Dr. Brett Devereaux of the ACU blog, linked in the video description. Without his work, this address would not have been possible. The Senate would also like to thank you for your attention and to remind you to like, share, subscribe, and enable bell notifications so that you may never miss History in the Forum!